A real frontline patriot brings you his one-of-a-kind perspective on freedom versus tyranny. This is the world premiere of the Political Prisoner Podcast, powered by Gateway Pundit. Now, live from solitary confinement, here's your host, January 6er, Jake Lang.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Political Prisoner Podcast. It's your host, Jake Lang. I'm coming to you live from DC jail. It's day about 972. I have on my calendar of my incarceration without a trial as a political prisoner right here in America. I have an amazing and very special guest today, one of my close friends, a reporter that is extraordinary. Her coverage of January 6th, Lara Logan's coverage of January 6th, you guys are about to see unveiled in her new series that she's doing. It's a mini-series run with the new media company, Sovereign, going in-depth on the story of Matthew Perna, the January 6er who lost his life to a suicide, and Roseanne Boyland, and just really uncracking all of the mystery and the in-depth stories around January 6th. Lara Logan joins me today live. Hey, Lara, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Jake. Sorry that you're still there.
It's part of God's will for the present time. He's using the January 6th political prisoner plight to unmask a lot of injustices in America and really root out the hidden two-tier justice system that is now been exposed to the very top. So, you know, it is what it is. You just got to grin and bear through it and keep on praying every day.
Well, you're a brave man. Strong.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're humble men in here. We got about 40 January 6th patriots in here. A lot of us are still waiting for trial. My trial is slated to begin in October 10th. We'll see if that gets pushed out for the third time. And a lot of other guys here waiting to get shipped off to random prisons all across America, federal penitentiaries, camps, low, medium. I mean, they're sending us everywhere. So it's quite the community, and I'm so glad that you have picked up the baton, Lara, and joined this community because you bring so much just experience and integrity, journalistic integrity that has really been missing from the January 6th community. And what you're doing with your new mini-series, these pre-recorded and taped out episodes that are super in-depth, about January 6th, I think is just heroic, and I applaud you, and I thank you for doing it.
Well, that's very sweet of you, Jake, but honestly, I'm just doing what every journalist in this country would ordinarily be doing if we didn't live in such extraordinary times. You know, I mean, this is a huge story to have people, political prisoners, imprisoned without trial in the United States of America. You know, people who would normally have gotten a slap on the wrist, right, or just paid a fine in Washington, D.C., who have lost everything, people whose lives have been suspended and families destroyed. I mean, the idea that we can do this in the United States and nobody pays attention and nobody cares, that's, that's pretty staggering to me.
Yeah, to say the least. Well, thank you for picking up the baton. So let's get into this. Let's talk a little bit about this mini-series coming out. Your new show that you're running is called The Rest of the Story with Lara Logan, and the first episodes you guys are putting out, I believe the first one is about Matthew Perna, a young man who took his own life in the aftermath of January 6th with a huge prison sentence looming over his head, a plea bargain that they were, trying to take away years of his life and throw him in prison, and he buckled under the pressure, God forbid. And now you're doing a in-depth coverage of his life called Injustice, the story of Matthew Perna, correct? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, what happened with Matthew Perna will be familiar to a lot of people, but, here you have a guy who was never charged with a violent crime, was facing 3 misdemeanors. They tried to slap the 15-12 on him. The felony charge, of obstructing an official proceeding, a charge that may or may not make it to the Supreme Court and survive because it's already been challenged by one judge right in one January 6th case, and there's a good chance it should never have been applied to any January 6th cases at all. But what really happened with Matthew Perna will be familiar to people because he was someone who had never been in trouble in his life and did not know. I mean, he's not a guy who's been in and out of prison and can roll with the punches. This was completely overwhelming to him. And finding that the DOJ has the right, the legal right, and the ability to constantly shift the goalposts was mental torture. And, having hearings scheduled for the day that the anniversary of your mother's death, those hearings, a day that is difficult for you anyway, and then having those hearings canceled, it's the same game that they play all the time that, quite frankly, January 6th has exposed, because they played these kind of games with criminal defendants before, but just, most of us didn't care or didn't pay attention because you think, oh, well, someone's done something wrong, therefore, they kind of, it's not supposed to be this way, but a lot of people sort of think, well, they kind of deserve what they get. And, that happens a lot with the January 6th cases, even with people on the right, they say, well, these guys shouldn't have done what they did, and so they lose interest after that. And they forget about the principles, of what it means. So we have tried to tell Matthew's story. One of the things that happens in media censorship, and in when you have a captured media, right now we're in something called fifth generation warfare, which is a war of narratives. And so the media doesn't just have a role to play. The media is the battlefield. So if you look at something like, how can they say that Larry Elder, for example, when he was running for office in California, that he's a white supremacist? People look at him and say, well, he's a black guy. Like, how can you say that? Well, you can say that because you're creating a false narrative. And, everyone affected by January 6th knows all about false narratives because there's growing evidence that in the midst of everything, people were set up. People on both sides, Capitol Police officers, protesters, and so on, they were set up, and this false narrative of insurrection was created, a false narrative that they're going to stick to and uphold no matter what. I mean, look at all the sentencing in the Oath Keeper and Proud Boys cases. They're getting longer sentences.
Just yesterday, 22 years for Enrique Tarrio. I mean, it's egregious that he wasn't even at the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. And, now they're saying people don't have to be present to be responsible, to be involved, and so on and so on. I suppose, like, you could say that, someone who orders someone's murder but isn't there at the time is still guilty of a crime. So that's their argument. But the reality is that we all know that what happened on January 6th doesn't even come close. It's not even in the same ballpark as a real insurrection or a coup or an attempt to overthrow the government, all the rest of it. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, every veteran, every law enforcement officer, and many others know that if you're going to overthrow a government, you have to actually have a plan to hold that ground and to run that government. So you have to have forces in place and so on and so on. I mean, in a way, it's so stupid to even be talking about it like that because it's so obvious that it's a lie. And yet people take it at face value, this superficial thing of, oh, they were interfering with democracy.
You have 1 minute remaining.
We're trying to stop the electoral process and so on and so on. That's the excuse. But that's all it is. It's a pathetic excuse, and millions of people see through it.
Yeah, I mean, and especially the people that are doing their due diligence, not the sheep, but the people, the American people who want to know more and are thirsty for more information, and not the media narratives and lies by all these, liberal, insane outlets that have just been feeding them this insurrection, domestic terrorist nonsense for years now. And that's what we're doing. And I'm so glad that you're putting forth your best effort to exposing the truth about January 6th. Hey, we're going to take a quick commercial break, Laura. We're going to be back at the other side of this. More information and more in-depth analysis about January 6th from Lara Logan. I'm Jake Lang. This is the Political Prisoner Podcast. Thank you. Hey, guys. Welcome back. It's the Political Prisoner Podcast. It's your host, Jake Lang. Where are you guys listening on right now? Are you guys on Apple Podcasts app or Spotify? If you want to listen on there, just go on the app, search Jake Lang, and tune into Political Prisoner Podcast. Or you could watch us live every single weekend, 8 p.m. Eastern, on the Blessed News app. That's a brand new app that's free on the App Store. Just type Bless News on the App Store and check that out. And Gateway Pundit listeners and readers, we love you guys the most. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Share this article. We are back live right now with Lara Logan. Lara has been an exquisite journalist her entire career, one of the most well-known and recognized names in journalism, and is now dipping her, I would say her big toe, but pretty much she's taken a full dive into the January 6th movement and trying to unearth all of these false narratives and misconceptions that mainstream news media has been spinning about January 6th, and just really excited to have her back here with us for more, just raw and unfiltered truth about January 6th. She's got the real story. She's working on an entire documentary mini-series that's being broken up into episodes. One of the episodes that she's focusing on, which has a lot to do with me in my case, is the story of the murder of Roseanne Boyland at the Capitol, one of the 4 unarmed protesters that died that day at the Capitol, defending our Constitution and standing up for free speech and fair elections. Lara Logan's got the complete story. Lara, tell the listeners a little bit about how you got first involved in the January 6th movement, about this Roseanne story, because I think they want to know. Me and you been linked up with this for a little while now.
Well, so Jake, as you know, right, it was when I watched your documentary. I'd never spoken to you, never had anything to do with you, and I watched your very first documentary, and that was where I learned about Roseanne Boyland and how she had died at the Capitol on January 6th. And I was shocked that someone like myself, it's my job to be engaged. I don't have the excuse like other Americans do, where they're working a full-time job and they've got kids and a husband. My job is to kind of know what's going on. That's, that's a really important part of being a good journalist, is to have your finger on the pulse. And of course I follow all of these things. So I was just shocked that there could have been the death of another person on January 6th. Everybody knew about Ashley Babbitt, and so they should know her name. But I just couldn't believe that I didn't know Roseanne Boyland's name and I didn't know her story. And I think, I know I was working on another series at the time, and so it just slipped me by. But I was motivated. I knew when I heard that story, I was filled with a sense of guilt, because my job as a journalist, something that's always motivated me, is to tell stories that deserve to be told. So when there's a great injustice here, like the fact that nobody knows Roseanne Boyland's name, that to me is a grave injustice. And what has been happening to many, many of the January 6th prisoners is a grave injustice. And I don't like being lied to, right? I don't like being bullshitted. I don't know if you could say that on your podcast, but I really don't. And so when when you see a situation like we have with January 6th, where you can see the big lie, I reported on this with Nick Sandman, the Covington kid, on the information warfare operation that was carried out, that was meant to continue to paint the Nazi, flag, and the sort of the dark shroud of white supremacy was meant to be cast over all people who supported Donald Trump and over Donald Trump himself. And I would say, that's really what got me looking back even at Charlottesville, because when you see something like that doesn't make any sense, and you see the way it's used, and you see sort of the universality of the message, there's certain things with information warfare that there's kind of a pattern. These things are done a certain way, and they don't really change. So it's not hard to start to recognize those patterns. And so that's kind of what happened with me. And when I saw it on January 6th, I knew it was an operation already. I knew instantly. And I was really encouraged by the fact that people on the ground saw it and started saying things, like F Antifa and try to stop people from breaking windows, because obviously those were actions that were going to change the nature and the tenor of that protest. And anyway, my whole point was just that I felt a real sense of responsibility when I learned about Roseanne's story, and then when I learned about what happened, to you and to other people who tried to help her, and how all of you have been targeted. You know, how people who almost died, like Philip Anderson, whose life you saved, you know, to have people like that now be charged, someone who, you know, has suffered terribly from PTSD and other related injuries, you know, there's so much injustice with January 6th. And so, my job is to try to speak to as many people as possible. I know that this is a heavily politicized event, and there's a lot of people that won't want to hear the truth, and they don't even want you to talk about January 6th unless you're going to convict everybody of a fake insurrection, which I'm not going to do. But, you know, I try to do 60 minutes style and level of reporting, and that is time-consuming. It's difficult. It's expensive, and fortunately, I have a team of people who are willing to give that a try. But you were really at the center of all of that, and when you reached out to me out of the blue, out of nowhere, and you said, I want you to tell Roseanne's story, I couldn't believe it. You know, I was just shocked because I knew the moment I watched your film that I was going to tell that woman's story. And what I started to say earlier before we had to go to the break was part of censorship, part of control of information is to make sure that the Roseanne Boylands of this world, the Matthew Perners, the Jake Langs, and all the other guys that are behind bars with you right now, you know, that none of them ever are more than a name on a page. You're never more than, you know, just another person in a charging docket, you know, before a judge. You don't become a human. You don't become a person. They don't know. What do people know about Roseanne Boyland? Who was she? What did she like? You know, was she conservative or not? Just because she supported Donald Trump doesn't mean she was conservative. Actually, Roseanne wasn't very conservative. She was marching in favor of BLM in the summer of love, as they like to call it, right? So, but of course, Trump supporters have been so demonized. And in this information war that we're in here, the false narrative is the world that they're creating. And they don't care whether it's true or not. But like every lie, Jake, they have to keep building pillars and legs to uphold it. And those convictions in the trials of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, those are important pillars to uphold the lie of insurrection, which is complete and utter nonsense.
100%. So this is one of the things I wanted to tell the audience and stuff. Lara has been flying around the country for the last, 4, 5, 6 months now, going on, boots on the ground, talking to the families of Roseanne Boyland, talking to Philip Anderson, talking to the video investigators, flying around and really getting to know these people and bringing that high level, that super high caliber reporting that she's so well known for, that needs to be done here, the 60 minutes level style. And so, this operation that she's running, these documentaries that are going to be unfolding within the next upcoming months here, coming out on January 6th that Lara's producing and reporting on, these are going to be something that I think that the more moderates and maybe even some Democrats and some people can really start to listen into, because it's not going to be, hodgepodge thrown together. This stuff has a certain level, a certain caliber, like I said, that I think any American can watch and start to have their own mind blown, their paradigm just be shifted and say, maybe we have been being lied to. Maybe, people like Roseanne Boyland, God rest her soul, have been mischaracterized by the media. She wasn't just another, MAGA or Trump sycophant or something like that. She had a life and a family.
Oh, you know what, Jake? Roseanne was funny. Roseanne was funny, and she was irreverent, and she was loving, and, she was a good person, and she had a great heart. And she struggled with addiction like many people in this country, but she beat it. She overcame it. And anyone who's been, those of us who've been around long enough not to judge, right? We know how hard these struggles are and what incredible strength it takes to overcome that. So I've learned to really, I have a real love for Roseanne Boyland's joy for life, getting to know her, and I have a real respect for her strength. And I got to meet a lot of her friends at home and her family, as you said. And wow, man, this woman was cool. She had she's not the embodiment of cool in the photos. You know, people look at her. She was from Georgia, and she was a simple person. She's not all fancy, you know, but she actually was incredibly cool, and she had cool friends, and she had a lot of people around her that loved her. And so, you know, she deserves to be remembered for who she was. And so, you know, that's a big part of why I'm doing that story. But I also want to tell you, you know, when you said this is 60 Minutes quality without the corporation and the news network behind me. This is people standing up, standing in the gap, and doing the hard work and being willing to learn how to do this 60 Minutes style, because there's not a lot of people who know, and other people who put their faith in me. And it's hard, because they're going to try to tear this down. We know that. They try to tear me down all the time. They attack me constantly. But, I mean, you guys know what that's like. You get attacked all the time as well. So, you know, I don't care. Honestly, I don't even read that stuff anymore. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I consider it, if I give them 1 minute of my attention, I consider that a failure, because it's not worth 1 minute of my attention.
I like that.
And by the way, Jake, I'll send you the promo when it's approved. And you are welcome. We're giving this series away. Everybody can run it. There's no paywall. We want everybody to see it. That the guy I partnered with, Ben Swan of Sovereign Media, that's
we'll
what
put it
he
up
wanted.
on the Blessed News Network.
Yes, put it on Blessed News Network. Yeah, that would be great.
Laura, I got to tell you that, you know, as you're describing Roseanne's character, my heart, you know, Father God is he's impressing upon my heart right now, because the Roseanne Boyland that I know, being incarcerated just 10 days after January 6th, the last time I seen her, she was dying in my arms. She was purple and blue, God rest her soul. And I never, you know, she means so much to me. And you getting to know her family and unearthing her character and who she really was and telling me about this is the first time I'm...
You have 1 minute remaining.
The first time I'm really ever hearing about the woman that died in my arms on January 6th, and it's really just stirring my heart and soul. And you know,
well, Jake, one of my jobs as a journalist, is trying to figure out exactly when Roseanne did die, and it probably wasn't in your arms, but certainly she was dying at that time. And I will tell you though as well that I met with family members, but I didn't hang out with them for a couple of weeks, and, you know, I can't call them my best buddies. I don't want to misrepresent it. Her family is in an extraordinary amount of pain, and they are still in mourning, and they are still trying to rebuild their lives without her and come to terms with this and move on. So these are decent, honest people, brave people who have been through absolute hell. And I was lucky enough, you know, to get to spend a little time with them.
Laura, we're going to pick this up quick and wrap it up, right? I'm going to call you back as soon as we're done with this commercial break. Thank you, guys. Welcome back, everybody. It's the Political Prisoner Podcast, coming to you live from D.C. Gulag. I've got a very special friend and an amazing reporter here with me, Lara Logan, former anchor or reporter of 60 Minutes, is with me and talking to you about the nitty-gritty details of the death of Roseanne Boyland, her new show and miniseries, documentary miniseries called This Is the Rest of the Story with Lara Logan. And it's truly just special what she's been able to unearth and some of the things that she's learned about January 6th through this. I mean, she's gone, it's a nationwide tour, basically. She's going and flying around everywhere and finding out and talking to the family members and seeing the investigations and going to the Capitol. And it's just great. And so Lara's with me live, and we're just wrapping up our conversation about the death of Roseanne Boyland. And there's a 2-episode actually coverage of Roseanne Boyland's story, her life, how she died at the Capitol, the police response, the inadequate medical response that the police had, and everything going on there. So Lara, you're back with me live now. We were just talking about Roseanne and how she died at the Capitol. There's been some new reporting out recently by Joe Hannon, which I know you had you guys work hand in hand in sharing information about this, about Roseanne may have been hit with some chemical weapons or a pepper ball inside the tunnel that made her collapse. Share with the audience a little bit about the timeline and the death of Roseanne and the police response a little bit, just so they can understand some of the information you know.
Okay, so to be clear here, Joe Henneman and the Epoch Times, Gateway Pundit, Cara Castronova, and Jim Hoft, these people have been working on January 6th from January 6th, right? So, I mean, nobody knows more about it than they do. And January 6th is huge. There's, over 1,000 defendants, and that's only one aspect of January 6th. And so there's no reporter that can take it all in and do it all. So I just want people to understand that I want to manage expectations. We are telling the Matthew Perna story. The show is going to be 20-minute episodes that are going to come out weekly, I think starting next week, and I believe it's on a Thursday. And so we have 2 parts on Matthew Perna. We have 2 parts on Jeremy Brown, who is a 20-year Green Beret veteran. We have probably 5 or 6 parts on Roseanne. And we have another 2-parter called The Setup, which is really just an effort to understand some of the operational aspects behind what we see on the ground on January 6th, which is something that I've learned about over the years of my reporting. And so when it comes to Roseanne and being hit with the pepper ball, I was just as surprised as everybody else maybe when I heard Joe Henneman and Epoch Times latest reporting that the family had told them that Roseanne was hit in the chest with a pepper ball. Part of the difficulty with Roseanne Boyland's death is that the family was told many different stories on January 6th. And those are conflicting stories. Those were also at odds with the coroner's report. And then the family, of course, had their own report done. But their report wasn't an autopsy. It was a report by a coroner based on the findings of the D.C. coroner. Because at that point, Roseanne's body had already been cremated with the family's permission. But, they were obviously in shock and traumatized and in a very difficult spot. And they're getting calls from D.C. that their daughter is dead. And also then that they want to cremate her body because of COVID at the time. And, they agreed to that. So there's no going back to Roseanne's body for answers. And what we do know, the one thing that we do know for sure is that when she was being worked on in the tunnel, after repeated attempts by yourself and other protesters to revive her, and after begging the police for some time to take her in, there's some Capitol Police officers that are obviously poorly trained and poorly equipped to really help her, and then some much more competent medical officers who take over. And at that moment, there is a point where one of the medical officers says to his partner, "I have agonal breathing and no pulse." And, when you ask, we've talked to a number of doctors about this, agonal breathing basically means you're technically still alive, but you have no pulse. And so you can be resuscitated if you can get to an ER, or you can get medical treatment. You can, they can do a number of things to try to bring you back. But it's very difficult. It's not impossible. It happens in ERs all over the country every day. But it's also very, very difficult. And so that's the point at which Roseanne, she's not declared dead until later on that evening at a hospital. But in terms of trying to figure out, what exactly caused her death and why is Roseanne Boyland dead? Why didn't she get the care that she needed? When you're using less than lethal munitions, as I'm sure, I know, Jake, they're not called non-lethal weapons because they are lethal if used in certain environments and at certain levels. And they stop being less than lethal. They become lethal. So definitely, we know that gas played a role in Roseanne's death. We know that police action played a role. We also know, I can't give away something. I can't give away something that is going to be in the documentary, but something that we learned in our investigation.
You have to tune in to figure out the full story. Of course, everybody listening here, stay on the edge of your seats and wait patiently. Go to check out Lara's Twitter page constantly, and within the next month or two on these Thursdays when these documentary 20-minute clips are being released, because we do need to know everything, the details about Roseanne's death. And, me personally, the one way I've always described her when I was trying to yank her out of that corridor when she was on the bottom of this dog pile was that she was dead or dying but resuscitatable, meaning like she was for all intents and purposes naturally dead, but if we had given her, if the police had given her proper medical care immediately, she could have been resuscitated. And, you've just confirmed that thought I've had, because when I had her in my arms, I knew she's not really alive, but she's also, I believe, resuscitatable with the right, AED shock or whatever they needed to do, CPR techniques and just getting her the right care. She could have been saved, and I feel that, and I know it. And it was pure incompetence by the Capitol Police why she died. And they not only,
Jake, I have to be honest with you. I don't know if it was pure incompetence why she died, because I feel like incompetence gives people a pass. People just think, oh, well, there's nothing that could be done about that. You're just incompetent. It wasn't intentional. And what I would say to you is there is something that was obviously intentional about January 6th, and that was not securing the Capitol, because a bunch of, a handful of police officers at some bicycle barricades on the path, that we all know that that's not security. And if you doubt what I'm saying, look at January 6th, look at the Capitol on January 7th, and that's security. You could have had that on January 6th if you wanted. If you thought you had all these undercover agents, you had FBI and other agencies, Department of Homeland Security, and so on. You had all these undercovers, you had all these confidential sources, because you were so convinced that the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and all these, white supremacists and militias, that they were such a threat to the nation. And yet, you didn't think that you needed to put any security there, because even there's video of Capitol Police officers saying, man, why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done that? This is a setup. I called a friend of mine who ran the New York Police Department for a long time, and the first thing he said to me was, okay, so where were they mounted? I said, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, one mounted police officer is worth 10 on the ground. And they have them, right? We've all seen them in Washington, D.C. You've seen police officers on horseback. So where were your mounted police officers? Well, they were nowhere, because they weren't trying to secure the Capitol. And that doesn't mean everybody. That doesn't mean, when you have an information warfare operation, you don't have everybody in on it. You just have certain people that have to be in on it. They have to have something called placement.
They've got to compartmentalize this.
They've got to compartmentalize it, but they need key people who can affect what happens on the ground. So why do you have Tarek Johnson, Capitol Police officer, screaming into his radio and he's getting nothing back? Because they set the conditions. When you have a vacuum like that, and you have no leadership and you put no security in place, you are absolutely setting the conditions for chaos to occur. So, after working on this for months and months, it seems increasingly obvious to me that the Capitol Police, the protesters, all of these people were set up. All of you were set up. The American people, we were all set up. Even the journalists who are just, assholes and idiots, right, they just go straight with the narrative and they don't even question. They don't look left, they don't look right. Even they were set up to a degree. Some of them, not all of them, because some of them are operatives. Some of them are propagandists and not real journalists. But, the ones who don't know any better, they were set up too, because you see something unfolding before your eyes and you're convinced that this is the whole story. This is true. That's why my show's called The Rest of the Story, because this is the part of the story that they didn't tell you. They didn't bother to tell you what Matthew Perna was like as a person. They didn't bother to tell you anything about him that would make you, because we can't risk that anybody in the public, maybe who isn't a Trump supporter, or maybe who didn't believe in that people should have gone to the Capitol on January 6th, or who thinks that it was a terrible thing what happened, right? Maybe somebody like that will want to hear that story, because they'll be like, oh, Matthew Perna was a Bernie Sanders fan. Wow. That's not, the typical image of a Trump supporter. Oh, one of his best friends in the whole world was this older black gentleman that he worked for as a teenager. And he was the one that Matthew arranged to be the person to find him hanging from a rope in his garage, because he knew that man loved him,
and he knew he was strong enough, and he knew he could do it, and he didn't want it to be his family. You don't hear those kind of details because part of censorship, it's like the lie of omission or the sin of omission, right? This is what is omitted. We cannot humanize anybody because we cannot risk that anybody becomes human. We cannot have that. You know, I was talking to an attorney who was a former prosecutor, and he said to me, I never thought about a defendant ever in my entire career. They were just a name on the page. That's all they were. You know, and I want to tell you one of the most powerful interviews that I did in doing this series and telling Roseanne's story was to go and find Victoria White because she was beaten in that same tunnel on that same afternoon. And I didn't know that you saw that. That's good. Yeah, well, Victoria White, I mean, my good Lord above. I mean, the beating that woman took from not one, but two Metropolitan Police officers, right? Officer Bagshaw, and I don't remember the other officer's name offhand. I don't want to say it because I don't want to get it wrong. But my goodness, when they lost their the sticks that they were beating her with, or the truncheons, whatever you want to call it, they continued beating her with their hands. And that woman is just, she has been through more in her life than most of us could ever imagine. And she has been browbeaten, and bullied into pleading guilty. And this is a woman who was beaten almost to death. How Victoria White survived that in itself is an act of God.
1 minute remaining.
These are the stories that make up the rest of the story about January 6th, and I'm so grateful, Lara, that you're taking on this mantle and you're championing our cause, and we're all going to be tuned
Jake, don't forget,
week.
I'm not a champion of a cause. I got to stop you there because I'm a journalist, remember? I always tell you this.
Yes, of
and
course.
You're
the one covering what no one else is willing to cover, which makes you a champion in ways. But you're after the truth, not after a narrative. And
but they want to paint me. They
want
to paint me as a right-wing lunatic, and and so on. And I'm not. I'm as grounded and sane and clear-headed today as I was during every minute of the 16 years I spent as a correspondent at 60 Minutes and the chief foreign correspondent and foreign affairs correspondent at CBS News. And long before that and ever since. They're not going to sway me. They're not going to move me. And you guys, you have the truth on your side.
Hey guys, welcome back to Political Prisoner Podcast. It's your host, Jake Lang. We're still here with Lara Logan. Very grateful to have her with me today. Just finishing up our just awesome episode. I mean, this has been a real eye-opener for me, and I'm sure for everybody listening on the Gateway Pundit and Blessed News and on Apple and Spotify. So thank you guys for tuning in. I have one more question for Lara before she departs from us, and it has to do with Donald Trump and the truth about January 6th and how they've been using January 6th weaponized against Donald Trump to kind of try to ruin him. But as these documentaries and as these news reports start to come out and people start to have their viewpoint shifted about January 6th to the truth of the matter, I wanted to ask you, Lara, how do you think that January 6th could actually become an asset to Donald Trump and his campaign and how he prevails over all of the lies? Talk to me about that.
Well, the one thing that I've observed since Trump was indicted is that a lot of people who have walked in those kind of shoes are taking another look at him. For example, there are many, many more people, Black people, African-American people in that community who are now willing to stand up and publicly support Trump, whereas maybe before they didn't support him, or maybe they supported him quietly. But, they know injustice, right? Because no one has experienced greater injustice as a community than the Black people in this country. And so they don't like it because they understand that those tactics that have been used against them for a long, long time, now they're being used against this guy, and he's supposed to be the most powerful guy in the country. Well, they know it's over after that, right? They know there's no going back from that. You don't get rights given back to you once they've been taken away. And so one of the things that we have definitely seen is that people are more vocal about their support for Trump since the indictments came down against him. The narrative with January 6th has definitely shifted. You know, in the beginning, you had sort of rhino Republicans and cowards who were standing up, joining their colleagues across the aisle, and in sort of citing January 6th as this terrible dark day for America, and, you know, blah, 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 all the nonsense that they said. Kamala Harris comparing it to Pearl Harbor, and that idiot Peter Strzok, that traitor, comparing it to 9/11, you know, and so on. So you had this, they had the groundswell was behind them in the beginning, and they have information dominance. So you know, that is pretty absolute when it's happening. And, you know, nobody stood a chance at that moment. But as more has come out about January 6th, you've seen that narrative shift. And a lot of Republicans or conservatives or independents or even Democrats who were kind of on the fence about it or thought they understood it have realized, wait a minute, maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't understand, you know, and maybe there is more to this. And certainly the fact that the federal government was forced to admit during the Proud Boys case that they had more than 40 undercovers on the ground, no one has yet answered the question as to what exactly were they doing. I mean, you can see when you read the indictments and some of the cases that CHSs were used to convict people, but we still don't really know and understand why did two Department of Homeland Security, JTTF, agents come to Jeremy Brown's door? Why did the FBI send someone to Bake Alaska's town, Queens Creek, Arizona, not exactly a metropolis? And they sent someone all the way from Washington, D.C., right before he left for January 6th. So what exactly was the federal government doing? You know, and so
I've got
does
one
that
for
help?
you, Laura. Wait one sec. I've got one for you. How come Philip Anderson was arrested 4 weeks before Jake Lang's trial, who was going to be my star witness in my trial? You know, this is the type of this is the kind of stuff that they're polling right now. This is the FBI
that's right.
that
they were trying to recruit people before January 6th. They were using those people on it, and they've been trying to recruit them after. The persecution of the American people that happened on January 6th didn't end on January 6th. It's ongoing, as you know, and as the families and the friends and, you know, and the defendants know, because they're living it every day while the rest of the country moves on, you know, pretty much oblivious much of the time. So is there a moment where January 6th helps Donald Trump versus hurts him? You know, I'm not, I always used to tell the anchors at the shows at 60 Minutes and CBS News, when they would say to me, what's going to happen with the war when I was in Baghdad or, you know, Kabul or wherever. And I would say, I'm not a prophet, you know, I'm not a clairvoyant, I'm just a journalist. That's all I do. So I try to figure out the whole truth. I try to let the truth speak for itself. That's why I was saying to you before the break that, you know, you guys have truth on your side. I don't need to be your advocate. You know, I'm not an activist. I need to hold firm. Every American, everyone in a free society needs real journalists. That's what they need. They need me to hold firm when I'm being attacked, when I'm being dismissed, when I'm being, people are trying to co-opt me, when people are trying to corrupt me, when people are trying to feed me bad information. They need me to stand firm, to pray for discernment and give it to God and help, you know, and do my very, very best. And so that's all that I am doing. Is it conceivable that that if we knew the truth about January 6th and how the extent of the setup and how Republicans and Democrats worked to undermine the will of the people and essentially how they crossed it? It's a cover-up. January 6th is a cover-up. Yes, it's an information warfare operation that was designed to cover up a stolen election. And also so that they could keep stealing elections.
Boom. Right on the nail on the head on that.
Let's not forget that. Yes, let's not forget that that's the real purpose here. They want to keep stealing elections. So when I hear Republicans, you know, talking about 2024, or I see them go up, you know, they're going on the debate stage, you know, I don't know whether to throw up or throw my television out of the window, you know, because the reality is no election is actually going to mean anything if you don't deal with the fraud that enables people to steal elections. And these people do steal elections all over the world, the same people. You know, their goals are pretty obvious here. They're going to cling to power at all costs, because if they lose it, then they stand to lose everything. And they've gone so far beyond the Constitution. They've gone so far beyond the law. They've gone so far beyond anything, basic human decency with what they have done. I mean, to every single January 6th prisoner, I've looked at other cases, more than 90% of the people in the Summer of Love with BLM and Antifa were either had the charges dropped or they were dismissed, more than 90%. And this is the kind of thing that in D.C., the kind of behavior that would normally get a fine. That's what you get, a slap on the wrist and a fine in most of these cases. And in the cases, of course there were people, I mean, when you have people on the ground whose job, they're trained agitators, their job is to incite. They know that you've got an emotional crowd, and so on. It's very easy for them to incite the mob. It's exactly what they did to me on the ground in Egypt. They threw words out. The operatives, for the Egyptian regime threw words out in the crowd that they knew would light a brush fire. And what happened? It started with "let's take her pants off," and then it ended up with me being gang raped and sodomized and beaten almost to death for nearly 40 minutes. So I know firsthand. When I say to you this is not an insurrection, I'm not reading from some college paper that some aging hippie professor shoved down my throat. I'm actually telling you what I witnessed because I have traveled. I've been in places like Burundi, during the coup when that government was overthrown, a place that most people couldn't even find on a map. I've been doing this for more than 35 years, and I don't know everything. Far from it. There's a lot that is unknowable. But is there a chance that if we can get close to the truth, that it will help Donald Trump? Of course. But it's going to take the truth. It's going to take an act of God. And it's going to take people reducing the cost of standing up. Because right now, it costs people too much. You're Tariq Johnson, Capitol Police. You stand up against what you have seen going on there, the intentional setup of Capitol Police officers, you lose everything, right? You lose everything and there's nowhere for you to go. So I would urge, if there are people listening to this, I don't care what side of the aisle that you're from, that you're on, if you want to do something, reduce the cost of people standing up. Remember the officer that stood up during the the betrayal of Afghanistan when we gave that country back to the terrorists that took down the towers on 9/11. Well, what happened to him, Stu Scheller? Well, he also gets thrown to the dogs. Everybody who stands up gets thrown to the dogs. So if you want to do something about it, if you want the whole truth to come out, reduce the cost to the people who are willing to stand up and tell it.
Well, the cost has never been greater to be a truth teller in America. And God bless you for your resilience and, the horrible tragedies that you've suffered through and not just suffered through, but triumphed through in your life. Tell the story of just your character. And thank you so much for being with me today and just letting it all out so that people can understand every aspect of this fight. Because when you have the truth on your side, like you said, it opens up doors that no man can open. And, God is sovereign and supreme, and He is the Spirit of truth. And so we're grateful to have the truth on our side. And we're going to keep on fighting every day together to get the truth out to you guys, the American people. Lara Logan, we thank you so much for joining us today. All of the January 6ers I'm here with right now, thank you for just covering this and being relentless in your approach to everything you do. God bless you so much and your family.
Thank you, Jake.
Can't wait to see the documentaries this upcoming Thursday that's coming out. Injustice, the story of Matthew Perna.
Not this Thursday, next week.
Yes, this upcoming Thursday, the next one. This probably won't come out for the next couple of days, but September, what do I see here? September 14th.
And I'll send you the trailer, and you can show people a little bit, 2 minutes of what they can expect.
Of course. Well, we're looking forward to it. Lara Logan, God bless you. This is the Political Prisoner Podcast. It's your host, Jake Lang. Stay frosty out there.